Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Shivam and I'm from ThreadSol. We are the world's fastest growing tech company in apparel space. So today we are presenting growth opportunities in Vietnamese textile and apparel industry, which is brought to you by Mosmi Ambasta's Stitch Diary, an educational blog in the field of apparel manufacturing. In our previous webinar, we discussed and we talked about all the emerging countries in the field of apparel manufacturing. We talked about Ethiopia, we talked about Kenya, we talked about Cambodia and Myanmar, etc. But at this time, we have chosen a country which has already established a strong hold over the global textile and apparel market. The country that is currently the third largest exporter of apparel in the whole world, that is Vietnam. And the reason why I think we chose this topic for the webinar is because there's a lot of talking on the internet about Vietnamese textile and apparel industry on the various apparel trade news websites and other apparel news websites. And like recently, I read an article that said that Vietnam's export to US increased by 13.2% in the first quarter of 2018 compared to the first quarter of 2017. And I thought, maybe it's the right time that we should discuss about Vietnam in a proper flow and, try to dive deep into the Vietnamese textile and apparel market. So before we start, let me serve you with the starters first. Uh, One word for the attendees: interact. Submit your questions into the question box in your webinar control panel. There's a control panel on the bottom right of your screen. I will try to get to all of them in this webinar. I'll take a peek at them periodically, and then we can also pick them up during our question and answer segment. If I do not get to all of the questions, don't worry, we will personally email you the answers by our experts to your questions since we have limited time. Also, this session is being recorded and will be sent to you in case you missed any part or you could not join it for the full of the length of the webinar. And you can replay and watch it again. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our panelists for today. We have two guest speakers for today's session who have great experience and knowledge about the global textile and apparel industry. Our first speaker is Mr. Saurav Ujjain. He is the business head of the whole Southeast Asian region for ThreadSol. He has over 10 years of experience in the apparel industry, varying from core production to sourcing strategies. Welcome on board, Saurav.
Thank you everyone. Hoping to have a great discussion today.
Yeah. Our second speaker is Mr. Navdeep Sodhi. He is the head of consulting and textiles at Gherzi Textile Organization. He is responsible for management consulting activities in India and sub-Saharan Africa, focused on textile and engineering. Gherzi is the leader for strategic development and expansion of companies in the textile industry from production to retail. Welcome on board, Mr. Navdeep. It's great to have you.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and looking forward to this interactive session on Vietnam. So welcome, a global audience.
Okay. So before we proceed with the webinar, I would like to put forward the flow of discussion to you all, to all the attendees. Mr. Saurav and Mr. Navdeep will be discussing about Vietnam's textile and apparel industry, both domestic and international. They will be focusing on positives about the Vietnamese industry, the negatives, the barriers to its growth, the current state of the industry, and how modern technology and machinery is helping Vietnam in its growth, which is the main point that we're going to be discussing today, that how technology has changed and how technology has helped in boosting the Vietnamese textile and apparel industry. As I mentioned earlier, Vietnam is the third largest apparel exporting country in the world after China and Bangladesh. But it's not been there since forever. Being at the 8th spot in 2010 with total apparel exports of around $10 billion to the third spot in 2017 with the total exports of around $30 billion, a growth of approximately 200%, if I'm not wrong. I think this is commendable. Saurav, what do you think are the major factors that might have resulted in this?
Thank you, Shivam, for the question. There are actually a number of factors which have led to this tremendous growth that we are seeing in Vietnam textile and apparel sector. It all traces back to 1986, the Doi Moi Revolution, which was brought in by government to ease the privatization of the industries, to make it easier to have private enterprises, to streamline the state-owned enterprises of that time and have private owners. That is how it all started. So it led to development of policies and regulations which allowed foreign investment to come in. And along with the foreign investment came in better technologies, better processes, better know-how, and subsequently the entire growth process started. One very key and intangible component of Vietnamese growth story that is often overlooked is the people of are essentially the people of Vietnam. They are excellent workmanship. So if I quote an anecdote that happened to me recently, and it has happened to me multiple times. Whenever you talk to somebody who is working in the quality field of Vietnamese garment industry, who are responsible for ensuring the quality is right, they will always tell you that our jobs are like the easiest on planet Earth, because when it comes to Vietnam manufacturing, quality is a given. The workmanship of the people are very good. This again flows back to the very fact this quality workmanship and the dedication to work comes from the very fact that 97% of Vietnamese population are very well educated. If we talk about the level of secondary education, then Vietnam, in fact, has the best level of literacy and secondary school education among all the Asian garment manufacturers. This all has led to a better, more skilled, well trained, more disciplined workforce, which gives you quality output and better productivity. Obviously, the incentives for the foreign investment, there the Vietnamese government has opened close to 120 special economic zones, out of which 3 to 5 are dedicated specifically for foreign investment. So these are for organizations which own 100% manufacturing in Vietnam. They are giving them tax rebates. The land is being rented at a very lesser amount. These all factors have combined together to bring this growth story. And if I talk of more recent advancements of the last 3 4 years, is the impetus of the Vietnamese government and the regulatory bodies towards more sustainable form of production. So controlling the pollutants, ensuring that the labor laws are enacted, ensuring that the labor interests are secured through better implementation of the policies, the right to unionization. All this has given the Vietnamese industry a very positive outlook in the eyes of major brands and retailers. When compared to a place like Bangladesh, for example, where the regulatory framework is not so rigid, you often hear of catastrophic, unfortunate incidences in garment factories. Vietnam is a totally different story altogether. So this has given a certain boost, and yeah, I think these are some of the major growth factors here.
Yeah, so as you can see in the presentation that I've shared, from 2010 to 17, it's a great trajectory. I mean, it has grown at a commendable, at a good rate. So, Mr. Navdeep, it would be great if you share your opinion as well on the same.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to, take it at three levels, I mean, one is at a high level, macro level. Then we would like to look at, the restructuring of the global textile and clothing industry. And third is we will come to Vietnam, because these three tiers of dynamics that are taking place have an impact on, the subject that we are discussing today. First of all, we all recognize, that Vietnam has clearly emerged as the new Asian tiger. Its position today is unassailable. If we look at the growth of Vietnam, the Vietnamese economy in the last 30 years, it's the only country after China which has recorded a consistent growth of 6% year after year. So this is commendable. The second thing, if we talk about the dynamics in the global textile and industry, and here I would like to share with you some slides to, illustrate some of the points that I would be making, So if you look at, this phenomena, it shows that that China, which emerged as the global number one player in the textile and clothing industry since its integration into the WTO, but China's competitiveness is coming under pressure. So what is happening is the emergence of a new phenomena, which is popularly or commonly referred to as China plus N, which means that the global buyers have come to recognize that while China will remain uh, supreme, there is a need to also develop other alternatives, and there is no second China. So, which means that there have to be several alternatives and several countries which have to be taken hand in hand with China as sourcing countries. So, here in this slide, you see various bubbles which show you the number of factories in different countries. And here I would like to point your attention to Vietnam, which has about 2,000 apparel factories, accounting for about 5% share of the global trade in textiles and clothing, So it's clear that among the alternatives, besides Bangladesh, Vietnam is a clear alternative. If we look at the second slide, it shows you the declining trend in China's textile and clothing industry. And this is a phenomenon that is sort of, entering an irreversible trajectory. China is, reducing its dependence on this industry because, it is becoming a more matured economy. It's moving more towards high tech, and, the availability of manpower towards, light industrial activities is reducing. So someone has to replace that. And that's where we see Vietnam entering, So here, what we have seen is Vietnam's success in the last decade or so is attributed, number one, to global or external factors, and second is to the internal factors. Now, in the next few slides that I would like to share with you, you will see the internal factors, how Vietnam has created a complete textile ecosystem. Now, what is a textile ecosystem? It's basically, it's centered around vision and policies which are created by the government or by, at the macro level. You have the enabling environment which facilitates enterprises, to succeed in what they are good at. It is also a function of factor costs, which basically determines the competitiveness of the value chain. It also, is a function of trade policy, which means, availability of preferential trade agreements and market access. But last but not the least, all these factors are there, but eventually it boils down to the willingness of the firms, both foreign and local, to invest in the industry. So if we really see, that Vietnam has been able to, create this conducive textile ecosystem, which led to investments. So let's look at, the investment trends that have happened in the last 10 years. So when we talk about investment, it essentially boils down to, investments upstream in the primary textile industry and downstream, that's in the apparel manufacturing or confection, which is closest to retail. In the last 10 years, if we see, Vietnam has consistently figured among the top 5 or 6 countries which have invested in textile capacities. So the first capacity we look at is in terms of spinning, that is the yarn manufacturing capability. Second is the fabric making capability, that is through woven or knitted fabrics. So here also, if we see, Vietnam added something like 70,000 weaving machines in this period, Next, you will see the installation of knitting machines, So about 13.9 thousand, that is 13,000 new knitting machines were added by Vietnam, making it the 6th largest investor in the new knitting capability. So Vietnam has built up a strong value chain in terms of integration. If we look at the next slide, it shows you the consumption of cotton, which is also a barometer of the increment in the production capacities. It is surprising that a country which does not produce 1 kilogram of cotton today is consuming about 1.3 million tons of cotton, only a whisker away from two other leading players such as Turkey and Bangladesh. So this also shows Vietnam's capability in terms of strengthening its upstream industry. If we continue to see some other trends that have emerged, it will again point towards Vietnam's emergence as a strong textile and garment producing country. So, I mean, as we have seen that Vietnam's success is a matter of external and internal factors, both at macro and at the firm level.
They're very, very valid points put forth by Mr. Navdeep. There's one more point that we kind of left out in our discussion is the Vietnam government's initiatives to undertake many trade agreements with multiple leading markets or having multiple trade cooperations with the regional players. So as of now, currently, Vietnam has 10 FTAs which are either already signed and ratified or in the process of getting signed and ratified. It includes the FTA with USA, which is actually responsible for the fact that 50% of all production of Vietnam is being exported to US because of the preferential tax and the duty avoidance schemes between the two countries. And yeah, unfortunately, TPP, which was a very major breakthrough expected for the Vietnam manufacturing diaspora, has not really worked out the way it was supposed to be. But it has came back as CPTPP, which is essentially TPP without the US. So it still has very good 7 to 8 business partners. It has recently been signed in March 2018, and it has been ratified already by 4 of the member countries, and in the process of getting ratification by the rest of them. So yeah, things are looking positive on that front as well.
So I think our audience has started the interaction and we've received questions. So first question is from Mr. Rahul Narula. He asks that should Indian exporters look Vietnam as an option for the future, seeing present trend? Saurav, would you like to take this one up?
Yes, absolutely. At the this current time, and talking of now, the policies of the Vietnamese government is very, very pro 100% foreign direct investment. So there are. I've done a lot of research on this recently. The government is giving you very cheap land rates in the special economic zones meant for the foreign investors. The abundance of labor is still a very good positive. The wages, though a little bit higher than Cambodia and Bangladesh, does offer you a very good valuable position in terms of the labor costs. Uh, the major FTAs and the trade agreements which are being signed is going to put Vietnam on a pedestal, which is going to have a huge amount of advantage in terms of the duty and other trade benefits. So yes, I think it's definitely a good idea for Indian manufacturers to look towards Vietnam.
Yeah, I think that Mr. Navdeep would also like to answer this question.
Yeah, you see, our company Gherzi has been present in Vietnam for more than 7 years. We have a local partner there, and we have done a lot of work, including on behalf of our clients in India as well as Turkey and other countries. So the textile and clothing industry is very global in nature. So if India has to be a key player in the global textile and apparel industry, there is no reason why Indian firms should not participate in that. There can be various modes of participating. One is to connect with this global supply chain. So if garments are being produced in Vietnam, how can Indian textile companies take advantage of that, either as suppliers of yarn or fabric? Second is, if you want to access markets where Vietnam has a preferential market access, it would make sense to also invest in those, invest in that country. So it is not a question of whether India should invest or not, or any country. I mean, once a country has decided to be a global player, we have to integrate ourselves. And since India's competitors are investing there, India will have to also take note of that. So this would be my take on that question. Thank you.
Okay, it was great to have your point of view as well. Uh, so we've been receiving a lot of questions now. I think we will answer that in the Q&A round. It's better that we move the discussion further for now. I was reading one of the articles, and one of the published articles quoted the leaders of the Vietnamese Textile and Apparel Association, or VITAS, saying that textile and garment companies would face many challenges in the coming year. They predicted that, and they mentioned the biggest challenge to be was the increasing competitive pressure from regional countries like Bangladesh, Myanmar, or Cambodia, because in fact these countries not only had breakthroughs in export market share, but also policies on social insurance and low cost land and tax. uh, Mr. Navdeep, would you like to take this one up?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Uh, while we are all impressed by the headway that Vietnamese apparel exports have made, emerging as the third largest exporter, but that is not to say that Vietnam does not or is not going to face any challenges, because that's the nature of our industry. I would like to highlight three major challenges that Vietnam industry will face or has started to face. The first major issue is that there is still a potential for further upstream integration of the supply chain within Vietnam itself. If we see Vietnam's upstream textile industry, there have been heavy investments in spinning. There have been some investment in weaving and knitting, but very little investment in processing, that is dyeing and finishing. So as a result of which, Vietnam is still highly dependent on import of finished fabrics. Yarn, it has a surplus capacity, so it is not able to consume all the yarn that it produces, so it is obliged to export a lot of yarn. So the first challenge is for Vietnam to be able to invest more, especially in dyeing and finishing, to have fabric available locally. This is challenge number one. The second challenge is more at the policy level. The Vietnamese government is also in the formative stages of understanding this industry, because in the last 30 years, it was basically the apparel industry. But now that they are confronting the challenges of attracting investment in dyeing and finishing, the government needs to recognize that there will be environmental issues, but that is not to shy away from them. The industry should and the government should be able to work hand in hand how to deal with those issues, because there are technologies available, to mitigate the impact of, for example, wastewater or air pollution. That's how other countries like India are doing, Bangladesh are doing, in terms of like zero liquid discharge and so on. The third challenge, which is a more long-term challenge that the Vietnamese industry will have to face, is because we must not forget that Vietnam is only 100 million people. It's not 200 million like Indonesia or Bangladesh. And there's a lot of inter-industry competition between electronics, other light assembly industries, and apparels. And it's quite normal that the workers, as they gain more wages and so on, they would like to get into other industries. So which means that Vietnam industry will have to move up in the value chain if it will have to absorb the rising wages in future. So I think any potential investor or trade partner for Vietnam should keep in mind these three major challenges. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Navdeep. Saurabh, would you like to add something to Navdeep's pointers?
Yeah, Mr. Navdeep was mostly right. But when we talk specifically in the context of the Cambodia and Laos, the competition posed by Cambodia and Laos, not so much of Bangladesh, then these countries also have the same problems of not having the upstream supply chain built very well into in their textile ecosystem. They also don't have many textile mills or yarn and dyeing facilities. The major challenge that we foresee currently, that has been based on a personal experience, is the last point put forth by Mr. Navdeep, is that certain threat. The apparel industry historically been an industry which always tend to go towards location which are offering cheaper labor. That has been the law since the beginning of time.
Yeah.
So that since in Vietnam, as we just discussed a few minutes back, majority of the workforce is young. They're all very well educated. They are all connected. They are all upwardly mobile. They all have internet, iPhones in their hands. If you walk across any street in Vietnam, if you go to a small shop or a small coffee shop or just a small grocery store, you will be greeted with free Wi-Fi. So everybody is very well connected here. So the aspiration and the ambition of the youth is definitely propelling the wages on an upward spiral. That is not going to correct itself. The wages will definitely go up in Vietnam. There are no two ways about it. So this is what actually puts it in direct confrontation with newer geographies like Cambodia and Myanmar. But the big advantage it has again is again the same people. They are far more skilled. They are far more disciplined. The productivity is in general much higher. The range of product that you can get out of Vietnam is significantly more, and the kind of quality you can get out for those products is significantly higher here. So the way ahead for Vietnamese manufacturers to counteract the threat from Cambodia and Myanmar would be to again focus on their strengths, focus on making more complicated, more value addition garments, which have higher quality requirements, uh, and yeah, that is it. That is what I would like to add on that. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Navdeep, any additions?
A very key, issue that any potential company willing to or interested in investing would have to confront. Uh, uh, you know, I mean, Vietnam must be really compared with Bangladesh, because the other countries like Myanmar, Cambodia, etc., they are still too small. I mean, in terms of their stage in development and also in their share of the apparel export. The
Export,
major
right?
advantage that Bangladesh has, its enterprise. The Bangladesh, there is very little FDI, so it's mainly driven by the local entrepreneurs. And we all know it that textile and garment industry is a very entrepreneurial industry. It's a very hands-on industry. So this is where in future the government will also have to put in place policies to encourage the participation of local enterprises. We see that local enterprises are present in apparel manufacturing, but this will have to get deeper and attract investment also in the upstream industry. And that would later on bring us to the issue of technology. Because it will be very important how can the technological capability or the ability of these enterprises to upgrade their technological skills can be raised. So this would really be my take on this particular issue. And I think we will discuss on this topic in the later part of today's discussion.
Okay. The next point, I think, what I'm going to be talking about is one of the major things when a country is and its exports are concerned, which is the trade relations with different countries, especially countries like USA and Germany. You know, as I, Mr. Navdeep, as I mentioned earlier in the webinar when I started off, that Vietnam's export to the US increased by 13.2%. In quarter one of 2018 compared to quarter one of 2017. Can you figure out any specific reasons for this? Do you think Vietnam's relations with the other nations like US have gotten better with time?
Yeah, I think it is not a matter of accident that Vietnam's exports to the US have increased at double-digit rates. There are three major reasons responsible for that. One is that TPP, which had been under negotiation for several years, it led to a certain anticipation in terms of investment and trade. So a lot of companies from Korea, from China, from Taiwan, and also to some extent from Japan invested in Vietnam in anticipation. So these capacities were created in anticipation. The fact that it did not happen, it was obviously something that was a damper, but it definitely did not, take Vietnam back to where it had started. So that is number one. Number two is that if we look at total imports into the US from preferential countries, it's only about 20% effective, which means that still 80% of US's imports come from countries which do not have any preferential agreement with the US. So while it would have been an icing on the cake for Vietnam to get TPP, but even without TPP, because of the other inherent advantages that it has in terms of productivity, cost competitiveness, and so on, it has still made a dent in the US imports. The third major reason which is responsible for this is that if we analyze the total imports of the US, they are now predominantly man-made fiber based. And this is where Vietnam has an edge, because most of the Chinese, Korean, and the Taiwanese companies, they have invested in the man-made fiber-based apparels and textiles in Vietnam. And this is where other competitors of Vietnam, particularly let's say Bangladesh or even India, which are more predominantly cotton-based, seem to have a disadvantage. So I think a combination of these three factors has led to Vietnam having the number one share. In fact, Vietnam is today the second largest exporter of share after China when it comes to the imports by the US.
Okay. Do you think the ongoing US and China trade war is affecting Vietnam in any way?
Well,
Saurav?
this is also one of the strategies of the Vietnamese government, and not only the government, but also the private sector, as we said, to develop alternatives to China. So that, China is today looking at a global supply chain. So China's philosophy is not just made in China, but made by China, which is why this One Belt, One Road initiative takes center stage. Thank you.
Okay. Saurav, would you
Yeah,
like
take
to
ahead
add
this China
something?
question. 80% of all the fabric which is being used in Vietnam is imported, as it has been emphasized multiple times here in this talk. So yeah, this remains one of the biggest danger for the Vietnamese industry, that the raw material is simply not here. You have to bring it from somewhere else and bring it in Vietnam to produce. So out of the 80% that the Vietnam imports, majority of it comes, almost 60% of it comes from China. Rest of it comes from South Korea and Taiwan, which is essentially again a part of China itself. So yeah, the trade war is not really going to impact as long as Vietnam does not develop in itself the capabilities of producing fibers, producing garments, producing fabrics, finishing fabrics, and putting it, complete the entire supply chain. China fabric expertise will keep them on top in the near future. That's true.
Okay. Thank you for your point of view, Mr. Saurav. There's just one point I want to address before we move to the main part of the webinar, which is technology. Just one small part, which is the domestic market in the Vietnam's textile and apparel industry.
Actually, Vietnamese domestic manufacturing has two divisions. One is the structured, corporatized, larger manufacturing units, which are essentially the same who are manufacturing for the export markets. They have dedicated lines or capacities for producing for domestic market as well. The domestic market in Vietnam has shown some good progress. It is growing at almost 15% growth rate year on year. Currently, it stands at about $12 billion, which is pretty significant, I would say. Another important point to note here is that Vietnam population, again, the people of Vietnam are usually very fashion aware. They are attuned to the art and aesthetics of fashion and the latest trends. So many larger organizations are putting in their money and resources, and they are opening retail stores in the name of the larger organization. For example, you can find stores named Tedo or TNG or Noisimex, which are essentially large exporting organizations in Vietnam. They have their own chain of retail stores all across Vietnam. So both of them are kind of developing in a synergy. It looks pretty promising. It's still at nascent stage, but the domestic market in Vietnam is promising. Again, the constraint here is the small population of Vietnam. It can only go up to a certain level. It's only 10 million people who are the consumers here. 100 million people here.
Mr. Navdeep, your point of view on the same.
Yes, I mean, as far as Vietnam's domestic market is concerned, again, we work with the local Vietnamese manufacturers, some of the very well-known companies. And I would like to, echo what Saurav mentioned. There is, again, a fragmented industry. You have a few players which really cater to the domestic market. And then you have this vast number of garment manufacturers which are highly fragmented, which again import fabrics and supply garments through these supermarkets and malls. So I think the domestic market, considering that the size of the market, 100 million people, also that Vietnam is now a middle-income country and a very youthful country. I mean, the average age of Vietnam is less than 31 years, so which makes it one of the very young countries, So I definitely feel that there is a huge potential also in future, to cater to Vietnam's domestic demand, in terms of fashion, workwear, even technical textiles to some extent,
Okay. Thank you for your point of view, Mr. Navdeep. So I think we should now move on to the major part of the webinar, which is the role of technology. Which is the next point of discussion. What role has the technology played in boosting the Vietnamese textile and apparel market? Are the people adaptive towards technology? Are the people not adaptive towards technology? Because recently, the Vice President and General Secretary of Vietnamese Textile and Apparel Association, he said that amid fiercer competition and taking into account the impact of Industry 4.0 or the fourth industrial revolution, Vietnam's garment and textile firms need to apply new technologies in order to help increase productivity and use less labor. What do you think about this, Saurav?
To understand this, we first need to deconstruct the way the Vietnamese garment industry is built. Almost 75% of all Vietnamese manufacturers are JSCs or joint stock corporations, which has some government stocks in it. Around 15% are foreign-owned entities, where foreign-owned companies from Korea or Sri Lanka or Taiwan have invested money and started the manufacturing setups. A few of them, only a minority of them, 2 to 3%, are private-owned entities, which are owned by individual private Vietnamese owners. So, if I talk specifically about the 75% of the JSCs, then they have been, if I can again take you back to the earlier discussion we had towards the privatization of the Vietnamese economy. At that time, a lot of state-owned enterprises were converted into JSCs or were remodeled in a structure where private ownership was encouraged for better corporate governance and so on. So because of this, we still have this sizable proportion, which, because of the very nature of its construction, because of the very nature of the way they are built, the decision-making process has been built, or the hierarchies. are a little slower towards adopting technology. But yeah, that is changing very, very fast. That is changing as we speak. In fact, in the last 2 years, I have seen a tremendous change in the overall attitude. Uh, then second part is the innovators, essentially the 15% foreign invested manufacturers. They come in Vietnam with their open mind, with a lot of expertise and skill sets from overseas. A lot of
Yeah.
them are mandated by the brands and the labels to incorporate the best manufacturing practices and put in the latest technology. So they are actually the ones who are leading the charge for technical innovation here. They are definitely a little bit more receptive towards technology and process improvements. And slowly but absolutely certainly, the Vietnamese organizations are taking a leaf out of their books, and they are looking forward to rapidly modernize and automate their processes.
Okay. Navdeep, do you think adding technological access will help businesses to have an extra edge or a more efficient approach towards penetrating into foreign markets?
Absolutely. The question of technology today is universal, and the businesses, wherever they are and whichever field they are, have to be driven by technology. This is the whole essence. Vietnam today has an advantage that it is now building its complete value chain. So therefore, it has an opportunity to embrace the state of the art technologies that are available. So my take on this is that the issue of technology is just is a matter of the push as well as the pull. So if I may share certain illustrations, if you could please bring up some slides on this that we prepared, it will give us a complete perspective on the impact and role of technology today on the Vietnamese apparel industry. First of all, it is the changing face of consumer and retail. I mean, if we look at the evolution of retail from the traditional shopping mall that started to online, and today you have consumers who are constantly engaged with their mobile devices and want to order everything online. So this is really creating a lot of pressure, coupled with the fact that today's consumers, they don't want mass solutions. So they want individualized experiences. So this whole trend about mass customization, of mass personalization, this is putting a lot of pressure. So the retailers and brands, they are coming up with new competencies. As a result of that, today you are talking about creating an experience and having data scientists within the companies. I mean, I was amazed to find, if you, by going through the website of one of these retail companies, and they today have a director of algorithms. I mean, we never heard about such designations before. The second topic is to see which kind of disruptive technologies are happening today. So if you could please scroll to the next slide, it shows that there are 5 major disruptive technologies that are having an impact on the global clothing industry, and also the industry in Vietnam cannot be insulated from that. So first is this emergence of this robotic tailor. There is this company called in the US, which has invented new technologies whereby the basic T-shirt or even basic 5-pocket jeans could be produced in a robotic manner. So which means that you are eliminating a lot of processes. Second is, there's a lot of digital printing and finishing coming in the production of fabrics. I mean, today digital printing is growing at something like 25% every year, compared to only 2% growth in the conventional printing. 3D printing or additive manufacturing is having a lot of impact. Then is the emergence of IoT and Internet of everything. I mean, so therefore, what the consumers want, not just a piece of clothing, but they want a complete system. So this is also compelling the manufacturers to strengthen their abilities in terms of using artificial intelligence, in terms of big data analyzing, the consumer behavior. And so if we look at the last slide that I have prepared for this section, is it is leading to the creation of new business models, so which means that in terms of your business models, your approach has to be integrated. And therefore we cannot really just rely on one part of the business. So as a textile or apparel producer, we need to look at five key topics. First is, all of us, we need to revisit our business model. Is it contemporary? Is it in line with the expectations of today's buyers and consumers? What kind of business process improvement can I make in my factory or in my organization? Is my workforce digitally literate, or is my workforce not capable of working in a digital environment? What is my sustainability score? And all of these things cannot be done by the enterprises themselves. They need technical partners. They need to work with other strategic collaborators or the technology solution providers. So I think these are the key takeaways, for, I would say, for garment manufacturers in general, but also Vietnamese manufacturers in particular, because they are directly, facing the buyers, in key markets like Japan, Korea in their neighborhood, but also the US and Europe.
Thank you for your valuable points, Mr. Navdeep, and I agree. Saurav, would you like to explain, would you like to talk upon artificial intelligence? Because Industry 4.0 comes with the advent of artificial intelligence, and I believe that it has a potential to change the garment industry, or any industry for that matter, to at a drastic, at a great level,
Industry 4.0 is essentially about having the different parts of a manufacturing post process talk to each other in real time. Essentially,
Yes.
it is all about upgrading the communication to such a level that as soon as there is some problem which is occurring, you already have the entire data going back to the downstream to take care of that, so that there is absolutely no time lost in because of that error or because of that problem occurring. This is Industry 4.0 in a nutshell, is essentially about instantaneous transformation, instantaneous transfer of communication and information across different verticals of the manufacturing operation. To give you a very simple example is, if I talk about IntelloCut, the product which we help the garment manufacturer. Yeah. So if I talk about IntelloCut, what it does is that it does not only creates a plan, but it sends the plan on the execution floor itself. And as soon as there is some anomaly, there is some problem which comes on the cutting floor vis-a-vis the earlier made plan, it immediately detects it, sends it back to the planner, and correct it in real time. This is in a sense what Industry 4.0 means: the ability to detect the problem in real time and solve it there and then, so that your efficiency and productivity goes up manyfold. There are multiple facets to it. It's a very long, complicated discussion. Maybe we can save it for some other time. But yeah, in a nutshell, this is it. And if there are some more questions coming from the listeners here, we can perhaps take it on.
Okay, Mr. Navdeep, would you like to add something?
Yeah, as I already highlighted, that technology has to be embraced, and today there are technical partners, there are technological solutions. Saurav mentioned about this IntelloCut, which is a great product. We have seen this, working in some of our client factories. Even our organization, we have tied up with this Dunkendorf Institute, that is DITF in Germany, to come up with the technological solutions and to, create something like what we call as the factory of the future. So I think the advice to the garment manufacturers is to talk to the experts and see how technology, how artificial intelligence can help you.
Okay. I think we should move to the question and answer round now, since we've received quite a few questions. Uh, So, audience, if you have any more questions, you can just type it on in the comment section. You can type your message, and our experts will be happy to answer your questions. So, we can take one question from Ekta. She asks that what is the basic technology a garment manufacturer requires, uh, and would you and what would be the ideal subsequent technology you would recommend? Saurav.
Well, the basic technology required is a sewing machine. That's it. That's it. That's all you need to run a garment factory. But yeah, that's the very core. That's the very beginning. Uh, if we talk about the contemporary manufacturers, you definitely need to have an ERP, which is kind of the backbone of your entire information system. You need to have optimization systems stacked on top of that, like the one that Navdeep was talking about, or like Intello Cutter, Intello Buy, which optimizes your cost functions, the biggest cost functions, in a way that your business becomes more profitable.
Okay. We should take the next question, which is from Mr. Paul. Uh, can you offer any insight on how Vietnamese manufacturers are attempting to adopt more digital processes or technologies? Is there any interest at all, Mr. Navdeep? Would you like to take this one up?
The basic fact is that the Vietnamese enterprises, they want to boost their productivity because that's the only way for them to, absorb this rapid increase in the wages that is happening, and will only accelerate in future. I have been to some factories which cater to some of the largest buyers in the US, and there, even the inspection system in garmenting and the compliance system, that has been completely digitized. So in terms of their pattern making, in terms of their inspection, in terms of their the whole CRM and order management, they are embracing modern technology. So we are quite impressed with what's happening in Vietnam, and this is really what will give its edge in future.
Okay. Uh, let's pick our next question, which is from Jerry. He asked that compared with China, what is the biggest advantage in Vietnam? Sort of. How do you compare Vietnam with China?
Better wages, similar quality, similar productivity. Essentially, Vietnam is the new China of manufacturing, with a more impetus towards technology for further improving their efficiency and productivity. If we talk about the current circumstances, the efficiency and the productivity of an average Vietnamese worker is close to 95% of what used to be in China, which is very, very good. Uh, Quality wise, I've already told you the workmanship, the art of making a dress in Vietnamese culture is very, very deep seated. It's very good. You take quality as something which is a given when you go and manufacture in Vietnam. So, yep, that is it. The cost advantage, while giving you the same quality and productivity. That's what Vietnam has over China, and that's why the business is moving here.
Plus, if I
Navdeep?
may, yeah,
Sure.
I would
Yeah,
also like to
sure.
add, the market access that Vietnam enjoys, that gives it a distinct advantage over China. Today, Vietnam has a free trade agreement with Japan, which is very much functioning. It has with Korea, which is very much working. It is in the final stages of negotiating its free trade agreement with the European Union, and also, although TPP seems to be off the shelf for now, but with this the TPP minus the US, that is EPTPP, this is something in the making. So this also gives Vietnam an edge in terms of China specifically.
Very true.
Okay. Uh, Mr. Satya Prakash asked that who is the major client for Vietnam textiles, US or Europe? What do you think about this, Navdeep?
Obviously, US is the largest market for Vietnam, followed by the European Union, and then Japan and Korea.
I think it's the same for the apparel exports as well. I mean, US holds the largest share of the pie as far as the apparel exports are concerned as well.
That's right.
Okay. Saurabh?
Yeah, I was saying that yes, that's true. I've been textile. I think by the person who asked the question meant uh, meant garments only in case of textiles, kind of interchangeable here. So yeah, the US is the biggest. 50% of all garments manufactured in Vietnam for export purposes are sent to US, followed by Korea, Japan, and EU. So yeah.
Okay. Talking of investments, we have a question on Roshan. He asked that, hi, I would like to know if Vietnam is heavily investing in apparels. Does this investment also mean increase in the number of manufacturing factories? Saurabh, what do you think?
The majority of investment is actually coming from foreign investors who are setting up new facilities, who are expanding the existing facilities, opening more factories across the north and the south region. Uh, to give you a very quick sketch of how the Vietnamese industry is fragmented, it has three main reasons. One is the north and northwest, the northeast, which is around the Hanoi, the capital region of Vietnam. Around 55 to 60% are concentrated in the southern region, the Ho Chi Minh City, the Mumbai of Vietnam, as we like to call it, and the Mekong Delta region, the Can Tho and the Ben Tre region, and the Dong Nai, the entire southwest region. And remaining 10 to 15% are in the scattered throughout the middle of Vietnam. So, yep.
Okay. Next question, I think it's a good question by Anchal Chawla. She asked that what new job profiles can be created with the introduction of artificial intelligence in apparel industry?
I think it will not lead to any new vacancies or new job profiles within the industry, but it will lead to a strengthening of the existing structure within the manufacturers. For example, most of the Vietnamese manufacturers have a department called technical department, which has a senior technical manager, technical director, who are essentially responsible for setting up the processes, systems, bringing in new technology, assessing it, evaluating it, implementing it, and then proliferating it across the entire group. So with the advent of new technology, essentially these teams will get more powerful in assessing and putting these technology in space, and they will have more and more say towards the final objectives and direction of an organization. Uh, I don't I don't see any new job opportunities being created here. Actually, the entire idea of AI is the exact opposite. With more AI coming in, the jobs will be going out. But I don't see that happening in near future, anyways.
Okay, let's move to our next question. Harsh asks that does Vietnam have potential to surpass Bangladesh? If yes, what would be the primary contributing factor? Which is, I think, which is a very important, very good question. That can it surpass Bangladesh to grab the second spot in the overall rankings of the apparel exports?
I think Mr.
If
Navdeep should.
Yeah. Well, as we all know, both Bangladesh and Vietnam are competing for that number two space. And indeed, it's not a very easy answer, but let's look at a few dynamics. One is if we look at the growth rate of Vietnam, it is certainly, far ahead of Bangladesh. And the reason for that is one is the Vietnam's focus on the man-made fiber side. Second is Vietnam is stronger in the US, which is a big market compared to Bangladesh, which is still dependent on the European market. The advantage that Bangladesh has is its local enterprises and its existing integration. I mean, Bangladesh has a far more integrated industry compared to Vietnam. So these are the advantages enjoyed by Bangladesh. As far as Vietnam is concerned, its major advantage is number one, its ability to attract FDI from China, Korea, Taiwan, and also to some extent Japan. Second is it has, in terms of logistics, far ahead of Bangladesh, in terms of market access and its ability to move around the goods. So I feel that both the countries will go hand in hand in future because they have their own sets of advantages, which are part of the key factors of success for succeeding in the garment space. it's difficult to pick a winner. So I think we have a very close race between the two of them.
Saurav, what do you think about the same?
I completely agree with whatever Mr. Navdeep just said. It's a very difficult question to answer, and it's going to be a very, very close race. Would be fun to watch. Let's see.
Okay. All right, people, it's time to close the discussion now, since we have a limited time for this. Regarding the questions which I could not pick up, don't worry, I will be sending the answers to the questions answered by our fellow panelists on your mail. So don't need to worry about that. A big thanks to our experts, Mr. Saurav and Mr. Navdeep, for giving us such good information and giving the audience such good information. It was a pleasure to connect with you for the webinar. I'm sure the audience would have got great insight into the topic and the Vietnamese domestic and international garment and textile industry. Audience, if you've missed any part of the webinar, no worries. A recording will be available on Stitch Diaries vlog channel as well as Stitch Diary blog. It would be helpful if you provide your feedback on this for this webinar, and we are open for suggestions. If you want us to do webinar on specific topics, you can send us your replies. Uh, Thank you again, everyone. We will be back again with a new webinar on such a topic uh, about the global textile and apparel industry very soon. Uh, Thank you once again, our panelists, Mr. Navdeep and Mr. Saurav, and thank you everyone for connecting with us.
Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot. Thanks a lot, Sharon.
Okay. Till then, take care and see you next time. Thank you.